This conference will now be recorded.
Welcome to DRTSPR show. This is Dr. Tangella Shiva Prasad Reddy alias Dr. TSPR. Namaste, Adab, hello, and a warm welcome to the senior advocate, Mr. Sudhish Pai, who is considered as a legal philosopher and a jurist by none other than the ex-Chief Justice of India, Mr. Venkatachalaya. What a way to forward his contributions because he is a legal author, having authored many books of strategic importance. We say jurisprudence or for law, or on law, or on those practicing law, or those who have practiced law and are no more, like the last book on Soli Sorabji. And that book, a great maestro, it was released on 31/10/2022. While he was releasing this book, just imagine, I was very fortunate to host that show live. With due respects to Sudhish Paiji, the erstwhile Chief Justice of India, Justice Lalit Kumarji, the current Chief Justice Mr. Chandrachud, and the ex-Chief Justice Mr. Venkatachalaya, and the present Solicitor General, and the past, with many justices and legal luminaries were part of that book release. So, this really amplifies his personality as the one who is just not idling. He goes to courts at this age, having his own son practicing, and I feel I envy his son having such a eminent, knowledgeable person as his guru, and he is trying to impart that knowledge not just to his son but to the entire legal fraternity, and in doing so the judicial activism which is revived so that every citizen gets justice, that is equijustice. That is what our constitution says, and that is why on November 26th we say this is a constitution day, equijustice for all. And what a better way to have Sudhish Paiji to enlighten us what is the constitution, how each and every citizen has become very fundamental when it relates to his fundamental rights, as well as he himself, every citizen being he or herself a constitutional authority, unlike the other countries wherein the constitutions were rewritten 19 years or 50 years or whatever it is. This 72nd Constitution Day celebrations, once again we revisit our constitution and the demarcation of the duties we call, whether elected representatives, administrative apparatus, judiciary, and lastly we call as ourselves as fourth estate or a watchdog as per article 19. So welcome to the special show, sir. I hope you will imbibe the spirit of 72nd constitutional day in each and every citizen of India. Yes, sir, please go ahead.
Namaskar. Thank you for your kind words on this 26th November, which is celebrated as the Constitution Day. It is appropriate to speak about constitutions and constitutionalism, and even more, the making of our own constitution, which is a precious heritage. Man's capacity for justice and adherence to the rule of law makes democracy possible. Man's inclination to injustice makes democracy necessary. The advent of democracy and limited government heralded the concept of state and transformed the status of the governed to citizens. Civilization involves the subjection of force to reason. The agency of that subjection is the law. Law, and even more, constitutional law, is the means of ordering the life of a nation and its people, and the relations between man and man and the state. Constitutional law is a part of public law. It deals with the state, its different organs, and their relations inter se, as well as relations between the state and the citizens. The aspiration to make power impersonal and its exercise accountable has been the motivation for constitutions and constitutionalism. Constitutionalism is an attempt to establish the supremacy of law. Men throughout history have longed for a higher standard by which their own man-made laws are tested. Constitutions are that higher standard. The belief that individuals have natural rights, inherent and inalienable, which are anterior to any written instrument like a constitution, that government acquires its authority from the people, and the purpose of government is to promote the common good. This is what conceives and conceptualizes a constitution made in the name of the people, defining the powers of the main institutions and delineating the relationship between various organs of government and between government and citizens. It is framed for ages to come, and as has been famously said, designed to approach immortality as nearly as human institutions can. Now, constitution refers to the document, like we say the Constitution of India or the Constitution of the United States, while constitutional law refers to the justiciable parts of the Constitution and those rules which have been evolved by courts in enforcing the constitutional provisions. Conventions, customs, usages are all part of constitutional law. A constitutional state is one in which the powers of government, the rights of the governed, and the relations between them are adjusted. Constitutional government, that term is applied only to those governments whose fundamental rules or maxims not only locate the sovereign power in some persons or bodies chosen in some prescribed manner, but also define the limits of its exercise so as to protect individual rights and shield them against the exercise of arbitrary power. The term constitutional law anticipates the term constitution, which in turn brings in the term state to which the constitution relates. A constitution is considered the very lifebreath of a nation and the vehicle for its progress. It is the supreme law of the country. A constitution is about division, distribution, and management of state power so as to prevent arbitrariness and establish accountability to law. It is a framework of political society organized through and by law, in which law has established permanent institutions with recognized functions and definite powers. All states, with some constitution or the other, purport to govern for the welfare of the people. But what distinguishes a democratic state from a totalitarian one is that a free democratic state respects certain basic human rights and endeavors to achieve its objectives through the medium and discipline of fundamental freedoms. Indeed, this is what constitutional government really signifies. The mere existence of a constitution does not by itself ensure constitutional culture or constitutionalism. Constitutionalism is essentially limited government under a fundamental law. It signifies the exercise of governmental power should be controlled to ensure that it does not destroy the very democratic values which it is intended to promote. It emphasizes that institutional arrangements must provide for effective control of abuse of power. Absolute power must be avoided by diffusion of authority, which introduces checks and balances in a democratic system. A politically neutral civil service, an independent police force, an independent academic and practicing legal profession, a free press reflecting diverse points of view, and of course an independent judiciary are essential concomitants of constitutionalism. A constitutional democracy is one where the majority will and rule are controlled and directed by constitutional principles. The successful working of a constitutional democracy depends upon not mere allegiance to the provisions of the Constitution, but imbibing a constitutional culture. It's important that this cannot be inherited in the bloodstream. People from generation to generation will have to cherish and nourish this. It underlines the need to preserve people's faith in constitutional institutions and institutional safeguards and underscores the ethics of the country's politics. The aim of good government is to bring about the security, welfare, and happiness of the people. And of the different forms of government, democratic government with a Bill of Rights comes closest to the ideal for the attainment of these objectives. The objectives of a written constitution in a democracy are broadly threefold. One, to establish the framework or structure of government. Two, to delegate or assign the powers to various organs or wings of government. And three, to restrain the exercise of those powers in order to preserve individual rights. Constitutions provide the means to guard against the state's capacity for invading the liberties available and guaranteed to all civilized people. A modern constitution, it is said, empowers citizens and controls and disciplines power. It unfolds a vision and goal and charts a nuanced path for its realization. A constitution embodies and expresses the goals and aspirations of a people, depending upon the history of that society. It contains certain core principles, values, and beliefs which cannot be tinkered with by the transient public opinion. The limitation imposed by constitutional law on actions of government are necessary for the preservation of public and private rights, notwithstanding even the representative character of political institutions. The creation of constitutional government, said Raymond Morley, is the most significant mark of distrust of human beings in human nature. It signalizes a profound conviction born of experience that human beings, vested with authority, must be restrained by something more potent than their own discretion. The Constitution being the supreme law, no organ or institution has unfettered powers. All derive their powers from the Constitution and have to function within the confines of those limits. In a constitutional democracy wedded to the rule of law, what prevails is constitutional supremacy. That is, all organs being controlled and regulated by the Constitution and functioning within the limits of their power. The judiciary is constituted the arbiter of the functions of all organs as grantees under the Constitution. The structure of the government is designed in such a way that each branch is a sentinel on the qui vive against the others, lest they become too powerful or autocratic. This indeed is constitutional supremacy, and in countries with a written constitution and an entrenched Bill of Rights, what obtains is constitutional supremacy. Rule of law is the subordination or subservience of the executive to the legislative will, which means that every executive action must have the backing or support of law. Under rule of law, the law is preeminent and a check against the abuse of power, while under rule by law, law can serve as an instrument for the government to suppress in a legalistic fashion. Rule of law does not content itself with ensuring legality. It goes further to speculate on the limits, on the extent of power that governments may have. The question is not just what legal authority government has for what it seeks to do, but more significantly, it is what authority government ought to have. As Lord Acton said, the important thing is not to find out what is prescribed, but what ought to be prescribed, for no prescription is valid against the conscience of mankind. The Constitution is meant to impart such a momentum to the living spirit of the rule of law that democracy and liberty may survive in India beyond our own times. The rule of law, in all its facets and manifestations, underpins the Constitution. But even more importantly, we must remember that in countries like ours with a written constitution and a Bill of Rights, a constitution that is justiciable, the legislature also is subordinate to constitutional values, rights, and limitations. And this is the concept of the absolute reign of law, the legislative power being subject to constitutional limitations. In India, we have therefore not only the rule of law, but also the absolute reign of law. So it is in a country like the United States. While in Britain, it is only the rule of law because they still have the concept of parliamentary supremacy. A written constitution with a Bill of Rights seeks to place certain human rights and fundamental freedoms beyond the reach of ordinary laws, because these rights do not depend on the whims of an immoral majority or the outcome of an election. Such rights are not the gift of any law or the Constitution. Instruments like Bills of Rights respond by recognizing rather than conferring those rights. As Professor Edward Corbin, a very eminent authority in American constitutional law, said, that is, these rights, owe nothing to their recognition in the Constitution. Such recognition was necessary if the Constitution was to be regarded as complete. The Constitution of India is one of the most comprehensive and well drafted in spite of its elephantine size. Our Constitution represents a high watermark of consensus in India's history. It manifests the best in our past traditions, provides a considered response to the needs and aspirations of the present, and has sufficient flexibility to handle and weather the requirements of the future. It's an instrument drawn with such meticulous care by a remarkably wise, articulate, and erudite pantheon of persons of outstanding abilities and backgrounds, who so well understood how to make language fit their thought and vision. The assembly was composed of persons of the highest caliber, drawn from different sections of society and representing different shades of opinion. The debates and discussions were profound and not marred by any narrow ideas or viewpoints. The deliberations reveal a high level of political acumen and standard of debate. The presence and participation of such a vast, inclusive cross section of society imparted a non-partisan character to the deliberations and enhanced the Assembly's authority, thereby facilitating the general acceptability of the Constitution. The Assembly accommodated diverse points of view, debated with an open mind, considered, reconsidered ideas and proposals, reviewed and evaluated comparative experiences on the working of similar provisions and institutions, looked at the constitutional canvas in a futuristic perspective, and built or helped to build a magnificent temple of liberty based on the message of unity in the mosaic of diversities. The constitution makers were conscious of India's wellsprings of strengths and recesses of weaknesses. Accommodation and concord underpin the constitution. The Constituent Assembly met for the first time on December 9, 1946. The deliberations continued till the 26th of November 1949. The Assembly's sittings were spread over 1084 days, which it held 11 sessions covering 165 days, of which 114 were devoted to the consideration of the draft constitution. It's interesting that the cost of this entire venture was rupees 63 lakhs 96,729. Not less than 53,000 visitors visited the assembly and viewed the proceedings from the visitors gallery. It is all this that makes us feel proud of our constitution makers, and it is appropriate on an occasion like this to recall their contribution and pay our tribute to them. The inaugural session was presided over by Dr. Sachidananda Sinha as the provisional chair. He was an eminent legal scholar and a consummate advocate. He delivered an excellent inaugural address, affirming his faith in the immortal destiny of India. In his inaugural address, he quoted the memorable words of Joseph Story. Joseph Story was an eminent jurist and the youngest judge to have sat on the bench of the American Supreme Court. And this is what Joseph Story said: "The structure has been erected by architects of consummate skill and fidelity. Its foundations are solid. Its compartments are beautiful as well as useful. Its arrangements are full of wisdom and order. Its defenses are impregnable from without. It has been reared for immortality, if the works of man may justly aspire for such a title. It may, nevertheless, perish in an hour by the folly or corruption or negligence of its only keepers, the people. Republics are created by the virtue, public spirit, and intelligence of citizens. They fall when the wise are banished from public councils because they dare to be honest, and the profligate are rewarded because they flatter the people in order to betray them." Very prophetic words indeed. Joseph Story also insightfully observed, "It depends upon the present age whether the national constitution shall descend to our children in its masculine majesty to protect and unite the country, or whether shorn of all its strength it shall become an idle mockery and perish before the grave has closed upon the last of its illustrious founders." Dr. Rajendra Prasad was elected the President of the Constituent Assembly on December 11, 1946. That post, of course, was earlier known as Chairman and then redesignated as President. The aims and objectives resolution, drafted by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, was moved by him on December 13, 1946. It articulated the basic values of the Constitution to be drafted. It was adopted on January 22, 1947, after a full-fledged debate and discussion, and this resolution was the basis and inspiration for our Constitution. On the 29th of August 1947, the Constituent Assembly appointed the drafting committee to draft the Constitution, and at its first meeting on the 30th August, Dr. Ambedkar was elected chairman. The other members of the committee were a glittering galaxy: Aladi Krishnaswamy Iyer, Gopalaswamy Iyengar, K. M. Munshi, B. L. Mitta, T. P. Kaitan, Muhammad Sadullah. On Kaitan's demise, his place was taken by T. T. Krishnamachari, and Madhav Rao replaced Mitta, who resigned due to ill health. The basic task of fashioning the Constitution was of this committee. The drafting committee and the Assembly as such were ably assisted by the Assembly's Secretariat, and two names stand out and deserve special mention, compel our admiration and gratitude. Those heroes remain largely forgotten. It is necessary we remember and honor their memory. Sir Benegal Narsingh Rao was the constitutional advisor to the Constituent Assembly and brought to his work his brilliance and rich experience. He prepared the first draft, which was the basis for discussion, That draft had marginal notes of reference to different constitutions. Rao traveled to various countries and held personal discussions with the leading constitutional authorities. His role in the making of the Constitution is truly seminal. Justice Frankfurter of the US Supreme Court was so impressed that he remarked, "If the President of the United States were to ask me to recommend a judge for our Supreme Court on the strength of his knowledge of history and working of the American Constitution, B.N. Rao would be the first on my list." Indeed, great praise from high authority and richly deserved. At the conclusion of the proceedings of the Constituent Assembly, Dr. Ambedkar, paying tribute to Sir B.N. Rao, said, "The credit belongs to Sir B.N. Rao, the constitutional advisor to the Constituent Assembly, who prepared a rough draft of the Constitution for our consideration." And Dr. Rajendra Prasad said that Rao was the person who visualized the plan and laid the foundation of our Constitution. I must convey my own thanks and that of the House to the constitutional advisor, Shri B.N. Rao, who worked honorably all the time he was here assisting the Assembly, not only with his knowledge and erudition, but also enabling the members to perform their duties with thoroughness by supplying them the material on which they could work. The other person who shines in the galaxy and to whom the nation owes a deep debt of gratitude is Surendranath Mukherjee, who was the Joint Secretary of the Constituent Assembly and the Chief Draftsman of the Constitution. It was he who meticulously drafted the various provisions of the Constitution that was finally adopted. Paying tribute to him in the Constituent Assembly on the 25th of November 1949, Dr. Ambedkar said, "Much greater share of the credit goes to Sri S.N. Mukherjee, the chief draftsman of the Constitution. His ability to put the most intricate proposals in the simplest and clearest legal form can rarely be equaled, nor his capacity for hard work. He has been an acquisition to the Assembly. Without his help, we would have taken many more years to finalize the Constitution." Very high encomium and well earned. Dr. Rajendra Prasad, speaking the following day, said, "Tributes have been justly paid to Sri S.N. Mukherjee, who has proved of such invaluable help to the drafting committee." In a comprehensive analysis of the Constitution, Mukherjee himself wrote, "It is true that many of the provisions in the Indian Constitution that are in the Indian Constitution are in other constitutions left to be dealt with by common law. But the reasons for such detailed provisions will be apparent if one only remembers the vastness of the country, the diversities of the population, the varieties of interests requiring safeguards." S.N. Mukherjee's place among the front rankers in the making of a constitution is secure. The original draft prepared by Sir B.N. Rao and the Secretariat contained 243 articles and 13 schedules and was ready by October 7, 1947. From October 27, 1947, the drafting committee sat daily scrutinizing each clause of the draft until its own revised text with 315 articles and 7 schedules was ready in 1948 February. Wide publicity was given to these proposals and comments sought. The Constituent Assembly began clause by clause consideration of the draft on November 15, 1948, and concluded this process on October 17, 1949. At the end of this consideration, there were 386 articles. There were 7,635 amendments, of which 2,473 were moved. The Constitution, as finally approved by the Assembly, was adopted with all fervor and enthusiasm on November 26, 1949, the day we now celebrate as Constitution Day. It contained 395 articles and 8 schedules. Some of the provisions came into effect that very day, while the large majority of the provisions were enforced on the 26th of January 1950, the Republic Day. The Indian Independence Act 1949, passed by the British Parliament, was repealed, underscoring the idea of our constitution being wholly Indian. This then is the saga of the framing of our constitution, which, according to Professor Granville Austin, was the greatest political venture since that originated in Philadelphia in 1781. It has been rightly remarked by Professor Upendra Bakshi that we live in an era of massacre of ancestors, which is now considered a public virtue and sign of progress. But collective amnesia of what happened in the past is not an estimable value. Without living in the past, it is necessary to recall the past, for it presages a future. We cannot forget or overlook the enduring relevance of the past or its torchbearers. It is in that spirit that we pay homage to the founding fathers. Our Constitution has undoubtedly been drawn from many sources. It's a happy amalgam of many strains. There is nothing wrong in borrowing, in adopting ideas and adapting them. As Dr. Ambedkar said, there is nothing to be ashamed of in borrowing, it involves no plagiarism. No one holds a patent right on the fundamental ideas of a constitution. And as Voltaire put it so profoundly, originality is nothing but judicious imitation. The most original writers have always borrowed one from the other. The largest experiment ever undertaken in human history in the art of democratic living and governance has been carried on in India since 1950. Never before and nowhere else has such a large section of the human population, more than one-sixth of the human race, lived together in conditions of freedom as one political entity. The Constitution has established a sovereign socialist secular democratic republic. The Constitution, we must always remember, represents a charter of power granted by liberty, not a charter of liberty granted by power. Meaning thereby, it is liberty which is the underpinning value of the Constitution, and power is controlled by liberty. Apart from providing a broad framework of government, it endeavors to protect liberties and secure justice. That's the constitutional vision and the goal. The Constitution is not just a legal document, it's a social testament and a political instrument. It, it provides for stability without stagnation and growth without destruction of essential values. Many of its provisions are aimed at furthering the goals of the social revolution, and the core of that commitment lies in parts 3 and 4, which together with part 4a and the preamble may be said to be the conscience of the Constitution. The judiciary is the conscience keeper. The Constitution's greatest gift has been an open society. The individual rights lies at the core of the constitutional focus. The Constitution has established a parliamentary system of government. It has also set up a broad federal structure which is resilient enough to adjust according to exigencies. There is a division of power not only among the three wings but also between the center and the states. None of the wings or units has a monopoly of wisdom, and in the pattern of functional distribution of state power, there is hardly any room for real supremacy. Limited government and judicial review constitute the essence of our constitutional system. It involves three main elements: a written constitution setting up and limiting the various organs of government; secondly, the constitution functioning as a superior law or standard by which the conduct of all other organs may be tested; and finally, a sanction by means of which any violation of the superior law by any of the organs may be prevented or restrained and, if necessary, annulled. That sanction in modern constitutional world is judicial review, which means a court of competent jurisdiction has the power to invalidate the action of any governmental agency, including the legislature, if it is repugnant to the Constitution. The court's fidelity to the Constitution secures its own subordination. Though the court has the last word on the interpretation of the Constitution and is the final judge of all acts purported to be done under the authority of the Constitution. But fidelity and creativity are not necessarily antagonistic. As Justice Frankfurter said, with devoted insight, they enhance one another. This then is our Constitution, which is described as a precious heritage by Chief Justice Chandrachud in the Minerva Mills case, and Chief Justice Mahajan called it a sublime constitution. The constitutional experiments in India may be said to be a saga of statesmanship, hope, and faith. There were sublime moments in this task. There were also times of anguish, travails, and turmoils. But the overall response of the Indian state to the democratic aspirations of the people and the urges of Indian nationalism has been one of great satisfaction. We would do well to bear in mind the insightful words of Dr. Rajendra Prasad in his concluding speech in the Constituent Assembly. And this is what he said: India needs today nothing more than a set of honest men who will have the interest of the country before them. If the people who are elected are capable and men of character and integrity, they would be able to make the best even of a defective constitution. If they are lacking in these, the constitution cannot help the country. Our failures, if any, and there are failures, are attributable not to the constitution, but it is because, to use Dr. Ambedkar's memorable words, man is wild. Every country, said the Earl of Birkenhead, has to work out its constitutional salvation according to its specific needs and problems through the chosen system of its political organization. But no constitution, however noble its ideals or lofty its exhortations, is self-executing. It needs the support of ancillary legal systems, both of common law and enacted legislation. But more than everything else, it is the law-abiding spirit of the average citizen that is the greatest asset in the proper working of the Constitution. It's interesting that a study about a decade ago named The Endurance of National Constitutions by three scholars, Adkins, Ginsberg, and Welton, says that the average lifespan of a constitution, a written constitution, is 19 years. Only a handful last longer than 50. The factors which help a constitution endure have been identified by the authors as specificity of its provisions, flexibility of the amending process, and inclusiveness. And I think we may rightly add a robust judicial process. Our Constitution, 72 years young, has these ingredients in the required measure and the resilience to cope with the demands of time and circumstance. It has fortunately survived for 7 decades and more. A former Solicitor General of the United States, speaking of the American Constitution, made some very pregnant remarks, which were again quoted by Dr. Sachinanand Sinha in his inaugural address. And this is it: Constitutions as a governmental panacea have come and gone. But it can be said of the American Constitution, paraphrasing the noble tribute of Dr. Johnson to the immortal fame of Shakespeare, that the stream of time that has washed away the dissoluble fabric of many other paper constitutions has left almost untouched its adamantine strength. Excepting the first 10 amendments, which are generally a part of the original charter, only 9 others have been adopted in more than 130 years. What form of government has better stood the test of time? I am sure this sentiment will remain true with regard to our Constitution as well. The successful working of a constitutional democracy depends upon not mere allegiance to the constitutional provisions, but imbibing a constitutional culture. It's necessary to build and nurture such a culture, and people from generation to generation will have to cherish and carry that forward. Constitutional values and aspirations will have to be internalized in the psyche of the nation. We need to develop and always have a decorous regard for and play by the rules of the constitutional game. The Constitution, ultimately, we should never forget, belongs to us, the people. In the unforgettable words of Justice Felix Frankfurter, democracy involves hardship, the hardship of unceasing responsibility of every citizen. Where the entire people do not take a continuous and considered part in public life, there can be no democracy in any meaningful sense of the term. Democracy is always a beckoning goal, not a safe harbor. For freedom is an unremitting endeavor, never a final achievement. And that is why no office in the land is more important than that of being a citizen. And it is to that high office that all of us, the people, are born. It is therefore that we need to constantly remind ourselves that the Constitution, our treasured inheritance, which we have to cherish, is presently in our keeping, and that we at once, its servants and its masters, renew and maintain our allegiance to the fundamental charter. On an occasion like this, a very solemn occasion, the Constitution Day, we can have no better wish than that the spirit of the Constitution animate our beings and its light illuminate all our thoughts, words, and deeds. May all of us aspire to the same noble contribution as the best of our forebears and be worthy of them and their great legacy and traditions. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, sir. Wonderful.
Thank
Very much appreciative of your. I think it should be a treatise because you are so precise. At the same time, you have brought out many unsung heroes. Let me name two of them. Mr. B. N. Rao, who was advisor to the Constituent Assembly, and then the senior draftsman, Mr. S. N. Mukherjee, who have been named by none other than Rajendra Prasad ji and highlighted by Baba Sahib Ambedkar too, Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar too, for their eternal contributions, one in studying the constitutions around the world, the other one in preparing draft, and as you rightly said, the elephantine constitution, preparing an initial draft so that we are all protected by that, the personal liberty or freedom. That is the greatest tribute, and I salute you for those wonderful presentations and the humans who are eternally remembered on this November 26, 2022. Otherwise, they would have been just part of the history, unsung heroes. And the other vital aspect, now let me come to you. Judiciary may be the last one. That should be the last resort because you are a pious and a legal philosopher as well as a jurist. So let me start from here, then we can go. The judicial review. The judicial review happens as the last resort when the absolute power blinds the executive, the administration, and their pampered media. Don't you think that judiciary has a quintessential role to play?
Yes, judiciary has very significant and sensitive role, but we must also never forget that as a people, we should get over the idea of the legal solubility of all our problems.
That's why I said last resort,
Yes,
because the
and
constitution
and,
clearly,
and, and not and not for everything. It can never be the last resort for everything.
yeah, I know.
Judiciary can never provide an answer for everything. It is
But
ultimately the people.
as an arbiter of the
True, that's
constitutional
right.
provisions,
Yeah, of the exercise of powers. But ultimately, the hopes and aspirations and the values have to be born in the bosom of the people,
yes,
cherished there, and ultimately executed in public life. Of course, the judiciary plays a role which can, I think, best be called what James Madison said, an auxiliary precaution.
yeah, an auxiliary precaution,
Yes,
because this is a parliamentary democracy.
yes, yes,
We are a people representative. We have representative. It's a representative democracy. But
correct.
what if the people participatory constitutional representative democracy doesn't cater to, as you rightly said, the personal liberty and the freedom of the citizens is the fundamental aspect. Because can we say that the will of the people is the constitution? Can it be termed that way?
In a way, because ultimately, the constitution is made by we the people, for us, we the people. So broadly, yes,
Yeah, because we have dedicated the constitution to ourselves, and
correct.
saying so, every citizen herself or himself or otherwise, they are all the constitutional authorities. Am I right?
Yeah, if not constitutional authorities, they are the ultimate, the ultimate sovereign. The
The
ultimate
ultimate
sovereign
sovereign.
is the
That
people.
is the better
Yeah,
word. Ultimate
yeah, the
sovereign.
political sovereign. Yes, the people.
The ultimate sovereign who decide what is that they want through
Yes,
their
yes,
representatives, right from Panchayat to Lok Sabha.
yeah,
So they are supreme, they are sovereign. Am I right, sir? And then
yes, yes.
how supreme or sovereign this constitution is when you compare to the constitutions of other countries, wherein they went on changing it 19 years or 50 years of flexibility, some amendments, but still our constitution is robust. Why?
Oh yes, oh yes. That is something that I think, in spite of anything that we may say against all that we have here, something that all of us can be very legitimately be very proud of. We are indeed an oasis in the surrounding desert. Look to the left, look to the right, look up, look down. You have no constitutional state, you have no democracy in the real sense. All our neighboring countries, many of them born into independence almost contemporaneously, have endeavored, struggled with constitutions, but I'm afraid not succeeded. We have, in spite of quite a few drawbacks, in spite of limitations, in spite of our aspirations for something higher, very rightly, but still we have a constitutional state, we have a representative democracy, we have worked it well. In fact, you would recall that when the constitution was enacted and universal adult franchise became a reality in India, because as you know, in other democracies much older and larger, universal adult franchise came only much, much later, perhaps only by in the first half or the middle of the 20th century. But we have had universal franchise, adult franchise from the very beginning. Western democracies and Western press were aghast as to what we were trying to do. But the same press 60 years later applauded Indian democracy, though calling it a boisterous democracy. That's all right, because boisterous perhaps only indicates we are alive and vibrant.
We are
So,
celebrating the
definitely,
spirit of democracy. That is why we are
yes,
boisterous.
yes.
The
So,
elections, the fanfare, and
yes,
now
yes,
let me come to the core aspect of the basic structure of constitution: the free and fair elections. which really upholds the constitutional spirit and with which the citizens' aspirations they really go. Do you think in this current situation, the free and fair election, wherein the adult franchise or the franchise is not enticed or imposed or in any way is made corrupt when he goes to vote for a particular representative or of a party? Is that happening? The second aspect, the same spirit, whether it is the party in ruling or the opposition or independents, can they have the same leverage when they go for elections? These two aspects when it comes to free and fair election.
I think it would be difficult to say that your first statement that it is happening in that sense. I'm afraid that is what should happen, of course. But whether that is the ground reality, I think we would have to say not really, not really. And that is where, we talk of electoral reforms, and that leads us to even more, I think, more important is reforms of political parties, because elections and the representative of our democracy has to be worked through the medium of political parties. And that's the system we have adopted, and that's the system that is prevalent in the modern world. As you know, it's not like the ancient state of Greece, that kind of a democracy. It's a elected representative democracy that has to be put into execution through the medium of political parties. Political parties are inevitable in the scheme of things. All that one would wish is that we have robust, upright, fair political parties who are grounded in ideologies and principles, and who have the good of the people essentially at heart. And if I may say so, political parties, no doubt, consist of politicians. Yes, you need politicians. After all, politicians work. It's the art of the possible, as they say. But we must also have at least a few statesmen in political parties. As is rightly said, a politician looks to the present, a statesman looks to the future. So we had eminent statesmen in India. We only wish their tribe increases, though I'm afraid the reality is that tribe is dwindling or has dwindled already. Of course, how to do it, I have no answer. There's no magic wand that we can wave. But perhaps this is again a part of the ongoing process that we have to keep on talking about this. We have to keep on doing something in the hope that if not today, a generation or even two generations later, this would become a reality.
The second aspect you did not answer. How come the party
No,
in power always
yes,
invariably takes the advantage,
no
not
advantage of
allowing this?
what?
In an election when they contest, they have got all the wherewithal. Being in party in power, all
Hmm, hmm.
resources at hand, and they decide the date of election. They either prepone or the vagaries we have seen in Telangana. 2018, the first assembly should have lasted till 2019. But to his advantage, he went ahead and declared the candidates for 101 constituencies.
No,
How
no,
can
that's
that
all
become
right.
less free and fair? How can it be?
No, no, no,
Because
no,
you
no,
are
no, 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 no. One minute, one minute. As far as when to call an election, I think, well, the prime minister, the chief minister in a parliamentary democracy can seek dissolution. You can't say it must run its full term. That's the upper limit, the outer limit. So, the calling an election is not essentially opposed to the constitutional scheme. The fixing of dates, etc., etc., is essentially a matter for the election commission, which is an independent body like the court, Supreme Court, and it is expected to function so. Whether there are aberrations is another point altogether. And
yeah, but here, yeah,
and
please go.
it is not always that the ruling party, whichever it be, X, Y, Z, that
Yes.
the ruling party, with all its wherewithal, comes back to power. Please, I mean, I think we can't overlook the fact that there have been any number of occasions when the ruling party, which was expected to get a victory, loses out. I mean, that I think ultimately is the sovereign will of the people exercised through the franchise. It may not happen every time, but it does happen. I don't think we can say it does not happen.
The mandate, I'm not questioning the mandate, the will of the people. But here, the ways and means you adopt, just because
No, no, no,
you are in
no, no.
power.
Sorry, I understand. What I meant is ultimately, whatever ways and means you may adopt, you adopt it to achieve a goal, namely success in the elections. But that is not happening always. In spite of all that, the people vote you out.
No, no, that's fine. But to be, we are discussing constitution on the constitutional day.
Yes.
Is it not that the free and fair aspect allows the party in power or the opposition, or for that matter independents, to have an equal leverage when it
Mm,
comes
mm.
to seeking the mandate? See, resources, because just your party in power, you have enough resources and you control the administration just for the caretaker governance. If you are advantaging that way, you are imposing and you are enticing. That means the franchise which is mandating you is not in a free and fair way. Don't you think that goes against the basic
Uh, to,
spirit
to,
of the
to some
constitution?
ex- to some extent, I wouldn't say it's wholly so. It is also because we allow ourselves to be enticed, isn't it?
Then that's fine. Then, but here I'm quoting one example of the Telangana State Assembly. It should have lasted
Yes.
till 2019. See,
That's
Article 3,
okay.
whatever you say,
No, no, no.
then
That
until and unless you complete your term of that assembly,
no,
or
no,
else
no,
if
no,
there is
no, sir.
any
No, sir.
constitutional
No, no,
emergency,
no,
how
no,
can you
sir.
seek?
No,
Then
sir. No. Yes, yes, yes. Absolutely, absolutely. That is the very essence of the parliamentary system. You seek an election. I mean, it is expected to be
then
exercised
you mean to
properly.
say now I am in power. Now
Yes,
things are turning against me.
yes, yes,
Now,
yes,
because
yes.
I'm in power, because
Yes,
I'm in power, I am heading the government. I am head of the legislature party. Now, I will determine to my
yeah. I will.
advantage. Again, I'm telling you,
Correct,
to my
correct. Yeah.
advantage, I will
Yes,
call the
yes,
election. And if
yes.
it
It
is
is inevitable.
disadvantage to the opposition and other independents or political parties, how can this be termed as a free and fair election?
No, this is part of the mesh scheme. You can't help it. And in spite of that, it doesn't happen that way. We have known any number of
It
times
is
when
happening
elections.
now. It
One,
is
1 minute,
happening. It
one
is.
minute, 1 minute, sir. 1 minute. We have known any number of times elections being called before the full term is over in the hope that you will win. You have lost. No less a person than Vajpayee lost out. In fact, India shining, the elections were called 6 months earlier in the hope, and it was everyone's expectation that they would come back to power, but did not happen that way. For whatever reason, I'm not on the political this thing.
We are not
Yeah,
here to go into that aspect.
yeah, yeah.
Every party,
That's
people
not it.
mandate.
Yeah, correct.
We are just being
Yeah,
discussing about the
the,
constitutional core aspect.
the principles,
That's all.
principles. Yeah,
The principles. Because if there is any constitutional emergency, they have cited two or three reasons. Only then you should go for the early elections. But if you are disadvantaging others, at least as you rightly said, Election Commission of India should be an independent body who should be looking into these aspects. Why this emergency and the immediate elections? There should be some reason. Just the reason is I am in power and I have to win the election. I have got all the wherewithal and I am announcing candidates for 101 constituencies by dissolution of assembly and putting pressure on the Election Commission of India conduct elections. And here opposition is caught unawares. Not only that, my petition you have
see,
already announced.
just,
One
I'm
aspect,
sorry.
I think this one aspect will help you.
Just,
I said
ah,
the one aspect, Telangana Chief Electoral Officer already on September 1 announces the regular adult franchise of that year, because every January 1 you get new electoral rolls, and he even he
hmm,
notifies stating that the new, those attaining 18, adult franchise should register, and any objections or anything will all be cleared by November 30th, so that the fresh electoral rolls will be out in January, February, and as usual, the elections will be held in March, April 2019. Contrary to this, on September 15, Chief Minister announces press conferences, dissolution of the assembly happens, candidates to 101 constituencies announced, and he attributes it to the statement saying that I have already met ECI, Election Commission of India in Delhi. They have already agreed to that. So I'm going to conduct elections. I'm going for elections very next month. And believe me, the September 1 notification issued by Telangana Chief Electoral Officer, he withdraws it on September 9th over and above all this, and he limits all this adult franchise exercise to 10 to 15 days. Thereby, lakhs of voters, eligible voters, were discriminated. Their right to franchise, to elect representative to the Constituent Assembly, but they were allowed in parliamentary elections next year. And the same Telangana Chief Electoral Officer, he went on record. We are very sorry. Lakhs of voters, they did not get franchise because we had to go for early election. In such a scenario, how constitutional this election will be? Yes, sir.
Yeah, I mean, you can never lose sight that there are drawbacks. No one says it is perfect. But when to call for elections and seek dissolution is an absolute prerogative of the chief minister. There's nothing wrong with it. Election commission is
I'm
not
not
the
going with
body there.
that. No, no. Now, that we have to that we have understood.
A-
Now, what I am
And
trying
the
to
other
tell you is,
and the other
election
thing is,
commission,
no, one
election
minute.
commission having announced notification, how can it
That's okay.
withdraw?
No, no, that's different. But once the elections are announced, I mean, once the assembly is dissolved, elections have to be held.
Then, sir, here again, we cannot have on whims and fancies of one political party just because you are in party in power,
No,
and
no,
that too.
that is the system. And one more
No, no,
thing, one minute, 1 minute. Please don't let the opposition never be that we were not prepared. An opposition is expected to be prepared every moment. The problem in Indian political scenario is we don't have an opposition worth the name. An opposition is a government shadow cabinet. Where do we have
yeah,
a shadow chief minister, a shadow prime minister? Where do we have a shadow foreign minister? Opposition sleeps
yeah,
when it is not in power. Of course, it makes noises. I'm not talking of this opposition or that opposition. I'm just
yeah, yeah.
making
We are not
in
against
general,
any
yeah,
party. Yeah, that is
not party politics. But
yeah,
to say, that the opposition is caught unawares, in principle, is not correct because the opposition is expected to be awake and aware every moment.
fine. That
Because,
is aspect. That is
yeah,
one aspect.
I mean,
That is there
in principle,
in principle.
yeah.
But here, the Telangana Chief Electoral Officer announces for the adult franchise, and all of a sudden, when he's withdrawing, you are depriving, discriminating lakhs of voters from exercising their franchise. How
No,
can you call this an
one
election?
minute,
This
one
would have
minute.
been a
No, no,
this would have
one
been a
minute.
deciding factor as per the Telangana Chief Electoral Officer himself.
No, no, what this could have happened for another reason also. Forget this. The same result. Let us forget Telangana, the Maharashtra, Karnataka, X, Y, Z. I mean, you have a government which falls for whatever reason. Governments can fall by losing majority, and if the government falls, you have to have election. So even all that I'm saying is I'm not
It is
justifying what they
understood.
did.
That is what I'm saying. There is administrative urgency when government falls. That is inevitable. I said
Yeah,
inevitable.
no, no.
That we are
Then
accepting.
these people there also these people lose their right to exercise their
But
franchise.
can you deprive lakhs of voters their
Hmm,
right
hmm.
to, that too after you announce the notification,
Yeah, yeah.
just
That may be a
because the
yeah.
politician
I
calls for the
understand.
election? The
I
constitutional
understand that.
violation. Now, these
Yeah,
type of constitutional violations, judicial review is a must. That's what I'm, at least to safeguard the fundamental principles of free and fair election. That is one aspect. The other aspect,
no, no,
the
sir.
judicial.
I have a different take.
Yeah,
Judiciary must not step in at every stage. Judiciary stepping in has been sometimes very, very wrong. Let
Then
me
here
tell you.
I'm not,
No,
and
no,
I'm
1 minute, 1
asking
minute.
only
There are
critical
certain
states. No
there are
question of
certain
judiciary intervening.
areas where it is totally out of bounds for the judiciary. We don't need judicial government.
Yes, yes. Judiciary was very clear. Last time Supreme Court also we said we will not interview, we will not
No, but
interfere.
they have intervened and interfered any times and defaced the constitution.
They
Karnataka
might
Assembly,
have.
it is so it is not that judiciary is our only savior. Judiciary is our savior, but ultimately we the people have to be our final saviors.
Final saviors. That the other aspect, because when it comes to the election funding in COVID-19 times, you said election commission should be
Hmm.
an independent body. How is that the upper limit of the spending limit of the candidates, assembly candidates, right from Panchayat to Lok Sabha is increased abnormally? How can you term
Hmm.
this as a free and fair election if it is going out of my bonds? How can
Correct,
I
correct.
contest the election?
It's
And
almost
don't you think
impossible.
don't you think at least this is the stage wherein suo moto, don't you think judicial review, then who has to, because people are not aware of their rights? And how do you think the people movement should come, and only then the saviors of so-called judiciary will enter?
Definitely not suo moto. No suo moto. Unless a petition is for them, no suo moto. God bless us. If suo moto things begin from the judiciary,
Right.
such matters, then finished.
Wonderful.
Never,
As
never.
a petitioner,
Yeah.
as a petition from a petitioner, then
Then
judiciary has to come to the rescue.
has,
And then the
has to
third
see what
aspect.
it is. Yeah.
Now, a third aspect. Now, these days, contractors and many others have formed a vicious nexus with politicians, administrators, and their pampered media. Now, this ill-gotten money, corruption money, this corrupt money, they are rerouting. Now, I'll give you an example
Mhm.
of Palamur Rangareddy lift irrigation and Kaleshwaram big projects. Bharat Heavy Electricals Limited, a government undertaking, has supplied pumps and motors. 1, 5, 6, or 18 packages, 1, 3, 5, and 18 in Palamur Rangareddy. The question was, what is the rate with which you have supplied? Because the quoted
Mhm.
rate is something, the accepted rate is something, on the paper, the amount released is something else. When the difference of amount through Hawala, if it has been siphoned off by the politicians for these corporate companies or infrastructure companies, and they are using that Hawala money to fund political parties to come out of that corruption. And these parties, when they become corrupt, having their corrupt representatives, again they come in a vicious circle, and these party fundings are also opaque now. Now I will not get any information as to which, whether it is here in Palamurangareddy, Mega, Navodaya, which are the companies who have given money to local parties or the central government parties. Now they have made electoral bonds opaque. That means corrupt elements in a vicious circle fund political parties, their represented elected representatives, they come back to power and they'll take control of these infrastructure companies. So the corruption is rerouted.
Mhm.
Top of that, the High Court of Telangana on December 13, sitting over the file for so many months, it dismisses the petition. And with that word, the entire South Telangana, the ruling party has won. That case comes to Supreme Court. Supreme Court is sitting on that. If they make the tariff of BHL out, everything is caught. Now, at the same time, this amount, funding of political parties by such corporates, how is that the government has made it opaque? And how is that the judiciary is not at all interfering in that? Election Commission of India is silent. Now, who should interview? This is a corrupt money. Vicious circle, it
Yes,
is rerouted.
yes. There
How
is
can our
there is no
democracy survive?
there is no doubt that the political process has to be free, fair, and transparent. I don't think any one of us can have any different view.
Yes. But the funding of the political parties, if Supreme Court just sits on that for such a long time, how can the funding of the political parties be opaque, sir? which I don't,
It,
don't understand.
it should not be. It should not be. And it is. This is where we. I think we need a law regulating political parties. Its organization, its functioning, its finances. But then who will bell the cat is another thing. But
And then
I
Supreme Court
believe
itself allowing electoral
no, no, no,
bonds. Supreme Court.
no. That is one aspect. I'm talking of making a law for all this. That Supreme Court can't make a law for us. It's only the lawmakers who will have to make.
Then how the
So
corrupt money? How can you say that
no, that
those
yeah,
who are funding a
I agree that no, that is one aspect. I'm talking of a more comprehensive thing which
okay, okay,
needs to be done, but how to do it is well, some wisdom must draw down somewhere. Either
some wisdom.
government legislation or even a private member's bill, if it could be moved. What happens then? Of course, at least there'll be a debate on that. Reform of political parties. We need a legislation to govern parties, political parties. Like any other corporate, their functioning, their internal democracy, their finances. Broadly, matters of detail have to be worked out, but this is a very, very sensitive and important area which needs to be addressed. There's no doubt about that.
See, all constitutional bodies, you have political representatives being appointed, or those who are in favor of those parties in power, they are appointed. And how can they function independently? And how can they be the constitutional guarantee
No,
independent
no,
bodies?
which constitutional body?
Whether it is Election Commission of India, whether it is judiciary, whether it is President of India, ultimately you refer to all those constitutional bodies with due respects to
Yeah,
them, because we,
yeah,
we
yeah,
need we assemblies. Then from panchayat to Lok Sabha, panchayats, their rights are being taken control by assemblies, legislatures and Lok Sabha always keep fighting with each other on the federal aspects. Then how can we be certain that this constitution is going to help us through, so that this democracy, we are the oldest and mother of the democracies, can
no, no,
prevail?
no, no, no. We are not the oldest. We are one of the youngest. England is the oldest, and England is the mother of democracies, not we. We are perhaps
Hmm.
the largest. That's all, not the oldest.
Hmm.
Well, what is the alternative, sir? What is the alternative?
You are a legal luminary,
No,
because
I
on
do.
this
I don't.
constitution, at
One
least we
minute.
should have those, you know sensibilities to review whether we should
No, no,
review
no, no,
constitution, or it is
no, no, no. What? Let me come to the crux of the problem. You may have 100 constitutions. You may have 1,000 laws. Unless you have, as learned Hand said, liberty, and you can say that of everything else, must lie in the minds and hearts of the people. If it is there, it is safe. It needs no constitution, no law, no court to save it. If it is not there, no law, no constitution, no court can do anything to save it. They are absolutely toothless. Because ultimately it is, and for that, as Rajaji said much before all of us were born, the foundation is national character. And national character is the sum total of individual characters. Because that's a distant dream, but we will have to have ceaseless striving and constant endeavors to build that. Because, see, ultimately, any constitution, and there is no doubt that we have a beautiful constitution. If by changing it, nothing is going to happen, I'm sure we are going into a far worse situation. But ultimately, every constitution, every law has to be worked by someone. It's the human agency, call it by whatever name, whatever title, but a human being, not someone coming from some other planet. This planet and this planet alone, on which we have all to live and die. So, so ultimately,
wonderful.
until we reform ourselves, there is hardly any answer. But that does not mean, I fully agree, that we sleep over this. But
We sleep over this, and we'll end with Rajaji's robust national character.
yes, yes, yes.
That's the
And
only saving
Palkiwala
grace.
And
Yeah.
Palkiwala also said the same thing, that it's ultimately the answer to all our problems is character. It was very, I mean, very nicely said, but not that it is easily done, but we must
It can be achieved. It can be done.
we must at
If
least
the will of the people,
endeavor. Yes,
yeah,
we
it
must
should
endeavor
be
to do that. As
the
you
will
said,
of the
that is
people. Yeah, if the will of the people becomes
yes,
strong, having a
yes,
national character, and in
correct,
electing
correct.
not politicians
The
but states,
proper people,
yeah,
statesmen.
proper
Yes,
people
at least some
elect,
statesmen. Yeah,
yeah, elect statesmen, less
yes,
of politicians, so that they will have a broader outlook for the future also.
correct,
That is
correct.
the only way.
And the good of the country at heart.
Yeah, yeah, good
That
of the
is
country
the
at heart.
ultimate thing. Yes,
Yeah, the
of course.
morals of this debate is very clear. You are whole and soul responsible because you have personal liberty and freedom. Once you understand that, you are the strongest. Rest everything will fall in line. All the
Yes,
systems, your personal
yes,
liberty and freedom and control. That is why we say the will of the people is the constitution.
yeah. And
And if
there's
it has
just
to, yeah, please, sir.
one more idea
Yeah,
that is important, which I forgot to mention. Though of course, this there in the talk. Let's see. It's very important that we build, respect, and cherish institutions and institutional safeguards, not individuals. Individuals come and go. Of course,
right.
institutions are composed of individuals, there's no doubt about that. But individuals are transient, institutions are permanent, or at least expected to have a permanence. And therefore it is important that, whether it is parliament, whether it is cabinet, whether it is judiciary, whether it is election commission, I mean, there are so many institutions which are in place. And some may have even, diluted or whatever. What is important now is, of course, how to do it. I'm sorry, I have no straight answer, perhaps no one will
Brother,
have, but
your
that's
next book
another
will
thing.
have, your next book should have those things.
But the
Let us hope
point
on that.
is, yeah, but the point is, that we must, as a people, respect institutions, build
Wonderful.
institutions, and cherish institutions.
That's good.
Individuals are secondary, institutions are the most important.
Permanent.
Yeah, they are
Yeah.
permanent. And therefore,
Because they
institutional
are all
safeguards is
constitutional.
what,
Yeah,
yes,
they're
and
all
institutional
constitutional bodies.
safeguards makes the working of a constitutional democracy possible and feasible. And
Yeah.
therefore, it is very important that, we have institutions. We have them, but we must really make them more robust,
Stronger, and we should
stronger,
cherish them.
working, and we must cherish them. Yes, yes.
We must
And
cherish
it
them.
is
So that's a
character that
wonderful thing.
perhaps it is character that would facilitate doing all this, because character
Yeah.
brings to our mind that this is important, this is to be done.
Yeah. The national character building of every citizen is very fundamental for the
Yes,
survival of people participatory constitutional democracy
yes,
by strengthening all these constitutional bodies, whether it is panchayat, municipalities, legislative assemblies,
yes,
Lok Sabha, judiciary,
yes,
administrative services,
yes.
whatever you say,
Whatever
they're
the
all, they're all, they should
bodies.
work independently, and they should work with full freedom without any bias towards anyone. And the policing system should also should be subservient to the courts, the
Yes,
judiciary. They have a fundamental role to play. Never get influenced by the politicians or the government of that
by
day
yes,
for
yes,
any wrong reasons. If you maintain that fundamental aspect of independence, transparency, and accountability in any given constitutional body, I feel why we will not survive in a much
yes,
better way. But for that, every citizen should understand that he has got personal liberty and the freedom, stating so he himself is a Raja and a Maharaja in this democracy. Once you understand
yes,
that,
yes, yes, yes.
no one can bother you and you need not fear anyone. Once that
Yeah.
happens, all
He's the
systems will
he's the
fall in.
ultimate master
Yes, you are the
place.
ultimate master. That is why ये संविधान के दिन आप खुद को जब आप ये समझेंगे मैं आजाद हूं और मैं ही सब कुछ हूं, तब अपने आप ये जो व्यवस्था है संविधान के, वो अपने आप जो पंचायत से लेकर लोकसभा तक, या कोर्ट्स हो, न्याय व्यवस्था हो, या इत्यादि, ये सब कुछ अपने स्थान काम करेंगे। तभी एक पारदर्शिता साथ हम अगर इन चीजों को काम करने की लायक कर सकते, तब हमारी संविधान के दौर पर ये लोकतांत्रिक चलेगा। और ये नहीं भूलना कि मंत्र कहां से नहीं आएगा। लोकतंत्र में हम खुद, हर एक नागरिक जो है, ये सोचना चाहे मैं आजाद हूं और मैं ही राजा या रानी हूं इस देश में, इस लोकतंत्र में, तब सब कुछ अपने आप अपने प्लेस में रहेगा। यही संविधान के दिवस पर हमारी इच्छा, और हम सोचते हैं कि आप इसी तरह की सोच से आगे बढ़ेंगे, ताकि भारत देश एक संविधान लोकतंत्र बना रहेगा। ఇదే విధంగా ప్రతి పౌరురాలు నాకు స్వాతంత్రం ఉంది, నేనే రాజును రాణిని ఆలోచన చేసినప్పుడు, ఆ భయం లేనప్పుడు, ఈ పంచాయత్ నుంచి లోక్సభ వరకు, అదేవిధంగా న్యాయస్థానాలు కానీ, వేరే రాజ్యాంగ వ్యవస్థలు కానీ అన్ని కూడా అనుకూలంగా, ప్రజాస్వామ్యానికి అనుకూలంగా పనిచేయడం మొదలు పెడతాయి. నీలో భయాన్ని పాలద్రోలు, నువ్వు స్వతంత్రుడవు, నువ్వే రాజ్యాంగ శక్తివి అనే ఆలోచన నీలో వచ్చినప్పుడు ఈ భయాలు దూరం అవుతాయి. అప్పుడు అధికారులు కానీ, రాజకీయ నాయకులు కానీ, మిగతా న్యాయస్థానం నుంచి అన్ని వ్యవస్థలు కూడా తమంతకు తాను పని చేస్తాయి. దానికి మూల కారణం నీ ఒక్కడవే. సో యు ఆర్ ది ఓన్లీ వన్, ది సోల్ వన్ who can save yourself,
yourself and the people
ourselves, ourselves, and this
and the
great
country.
democracy like India. Thank you very,
True.
very much, sir. Take care. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you. Namaskar.
And
Namaskar.
namaskar. And again, once again, I wish every citizen that he becomes a constitutional authority without any fear, that he is independent and he is the ruler. And in a democracy, he is the supreme, he is the
Correct.
sovereign.
Ultimate
That is the
master. Yeah.
only way. That is the only way people participatory constitutional democracy will
Yeah.
survive for ever
Ages
and
to come.
ever,
Yes.
in spite of impediments of corruption, nepotism, favoritism, or non-function of independent bodies too. Because
Yeah.
if you reign supreme, if you are reign sovereign, everything will fall in line
All in place.
automatically.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Do support DRTSPR channels in the same spirit as we have made this show. Don't forget
Yeah.
that this is a constitutional day, and these channels with wonderful guests like senior advocate Sudhish Pai ji, they all come to sensitize you, to disseminate information as per rule of law, constitution, and evidential act, whatever it is, which governs all these constitutional bodies by making you the supreme and sovereign. Thank you very much, sir. Good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
And I
Namaskar.
wish that you participate regularly on
You.
these
Yeah.
channels.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. Good night.
Namaskar. Good night.